It was a very unusual invasion because all of the soldiers marching on Baltimore were Chia Pets, which are not normally associated with an invading army trying to take over a major U.S. city. No, Chia Pets are normally, well, statues for one thing, and statues growing a hair of tiny little plants. But none of that stopped this army of Chia Pets from doing its thing. It was impressive in its own way. There were hundreds, thousands even. And Chia Pets come in all sorts of different sizes and shapes. Although Ollie was sure, not that he was an expert in Chia Pets, it somewhat predated him, but he'd never seen the ones that were the size of a cargo van. But there were indeed many of those. The Chia Pets, especially the large ones, they could shoot chia gel, spit chia gel, in most of the cases. Which wasn't a terribly devastating attack, but, well, Ollie had gotten called in pretty early into the situation because the mayor kind of figured that this was Ollie's kind of a thing. Ollie could not really even get close. Not that he was 100% sure what he was getting close to. But when he tried to walk through the ranks, the little ones would all swarm and just kind of push him out of the way. They didn't really do anything to hurt him exactly. They sort of got dragged against the pavement a little bit as they were pushing him. But when he tried to swing in from a tree, some of the bigger ones had slurped him with chia gel, which again was not terribly painful, but it did stop him from getting any closer. Ollie was stumped. And he decided to go back up into a tree because they were kind of at this point marching downtown on 2 or 3 streets wide. There was a battalion on Charles Street, one on St. Paul, one on Calvert, and the roads that Calvert kind of changes among. They had gone down mostly York Road for a while, but they'd turned up kind of in the Roland Park neighborhood went down a different way. Anyway, Ollie got up in one of the trees, not to try and swing in again, but this time he'd gotten his hands on some binoculars. Because he'd realized that just kind of rushing into the mass of them, which for one thing wasn't working, but for another thing, wasn't sure what he was rushing to. So he got his binoculars and tried to see what the organizing principle was. He'd managed to grab one when he was being shoved out earlier. Tried to inspect it, but it just looked like a normal Chia Pet. Once it got separated from the herd, it didn't move or anything anymore, and I was pretty sure it wasn't alive, so he opened up the bottom. No guts or robot bits or anything. Some kind of magic, Ollie concluded. Either that or technology way more advanced than all I could even distinguish from magic. So he's looking for something mystical, magical, warlockish, and eventually he spotted it. Way, not quite in the middle, but about a third of the way from the back of the pack. There was a platform. Oops, sorry, ready? There's a platform, and on it was a chair, a big chair, with a little control panel, a couple other chairs, and then people in all those chairs. And the person in the big chair was holding a silver microphone. He couldn't quite hear what the person was saying, But it seemed like when they said something into the microphone, the Chia Pets did something. They made some kind of change. They changed formation. They swarmed a car. They picked a person and kind of shoved them out of the way. Oh, you can put birdie, it's okay. It's got to be something with that microphone, Ollie said, but how can I get to them? He thought about having Harry the Hawk fly him in there and drop him, but he was afraid that he'd just get hit with the Chia gel again, and then he'd be in for a long, uncomfortable fall. And Harry might be too if they got him in all gel. Birds don't fly as well when their wings are wet, let alone covered in seed gels. So I was thinking, and he was thinking. And then he realized he had an idea, but it would require patience. Because what he noticed when he looked carefully at the platform with the person on the chair was that it was being carried on the backs of 5 kind of medium-sized Chia Pets. But unless all his eyes were deceiving him, there weren't any Chia Pets underneath. It was just being held up at the corners. And the platform was moving down St. Paul Street. And one thing that you find in the center of streets is manholes for the sewer and the storm drain. So Ollie scouted down the street in the path where they were walking. He saw that there was a storm drain entrance. And it was just about to reach the front of the wave of Chia Pets. Ollie ran to go 2 manhole entrances further down. And he was going to try and lift the manhole, but he realized he didn't really have the strength or the leverage to do that. But then he remembered that if it's the storm drain, which it should be, it's also going to be connected to the gutters. Now, Ollie doesn't like crawling around in storm drains and sewers, but between the two, a storm drain's not such a bad place to be. So he slipped his way into the storm drain. It was there at the corner. Found his way through the pipe until he was pretty sure he was in the center of the street because he could see the light from one of the manholes, the one that he'd been considering lifting. From there, it was pretty easy to tell. It was a fairly straight shot. The pipe went north, in theory, right under the Chia Pets. So I went as quickly as he could. It went 2 manholes north. He could hear the Chia Pets marching above, so he knew he was in the right spot. He climbed up to the bottom side of the manhole and started looking up through the little kind of handhold things. It's a little hard to tell what was going on. It wasn't a very good vantage point. But then, about the time that Ollie sort of expected the platform to pass over, he heard some footsteps stomping right on the manhole, and then it got quieter and dark, and Ollie realized it was his opportunity. So he pushed as hard as he could to lift up one corner of the manhole and slipped out, almost pinched himself when he let go of the manhole. He was worried that they would hear the manhole closing, but there was too much marching and stomping Chia Pet noise. They didn't seem to notice him. At first, he just walked along underneath the platform. He was there. Nobody seemed to have noticed him. What was he going to do next? Ollie decided he needed to kind of do a little trial balloon. There was a couple of different things that could work. He'd prefer to be sneaky, but if the Chia Pets could see or hear that there was no clear way for him to sneak out, in which case it might be just a case of making chaos, trying to tip over the platform, steal the microphone or something. But it'd be easier and more predictable. It's kind of less unpredictable, but more predictable if he could sneak. So he let himself fall a little bit behind until he was almost out from underneath the shadow of the platform. And then he poked his head out, sure that the people on the platform couldn't see him because he was behind them, but that if the Chia Pets could see, that they could see him. Well, if they saw him, they gave no indication. They didn't change their behavior at all. They just marched right along. So, facing no opposition, Ollie climbed up as silently as he could on top of the platform. He could feel his movement, his weight, moving the platform a little bit, but he was guessing that on top of the movement of the walking Chia Pets, nobody would notice, and indeed, nobody seemed to. Now I could see clearly there were 3 people in the smaller chairs and 1 person in the bigger chair. And now he could hear them, the person in the bigger chair, yelling orders into the microphone. Stomp that tree, or push that car, or whatever it was. And he would point, and it would do things. But then he noticed that he would lean over and talk to the people in the other chairs. They must have had maps or drones or something. So when he talked to them, the Chia Pets didn't seem to do anything. It all seemed to be connected to that microphone, which all I could now see wasn't just silver. It was sparkling in the sunlight, almost glowing. So I figured that's got to be the key to it. And he waited until the person was relaxed. Chia Pet invasion was going smoothly. And they sat back in their chair and held the microphone out and off to the end, in a hand, dangling in open space. Well, I knew he had an opportunity. So he snuck as close as he could behind the people in the smaller chairs. And in one big motion, he used 2 of the smaller chairs to launch himself in the air straight at the microphone. He hit it square and grabbed it with all of his arms and managed to wrench it out of the hand of the person in the big chair. He went rolling over the side of the platform. And that wasn't really intentional, but it seemed to work pretty well. All of a sudden there was yelling and shouting. And the Chia Pets, well, they seemed unperturbed. They just kept on doing what they were doing. But the people started to scramble off the platform and try and get underneath, try and get to Ollie. And he thought to himself, well, there's one way to see if this works. I don't have a whole lot of ways out of this situation, so Ollie pulled the microphone out and hollered a command into it. Take your former leaders, surround them, pin them, hold them down. At that, the person in the big chair started to try and run. The other 3 people, it took them a second more to figure out what was about to happen. But for none of them were they fast enough. Because all of the Chia Pets of all the sizes turned and faced their former masters. And just as mindlessly, enchantedly as they'd been marching on downtown Baltimore, they surrounded and captured all 4 of them. In the unlucky case of the head person, the person that had been in the big chair, it was some of the medium-sized and big ones that caught up to him, and they'd covered him in Chia gel. So he was very drenched, very unhappy, and surrounded by, well, they still weren't angry-looking. They were still Chia Pets, but stern-looking anyway. Well, I thought about going over and talking to the person, but he realized he wasn't even sure what questions to ask. So he just called the police and said, I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure the Chia Pets are safe. And I've got your perpetrators. Well, they're gonna stay put. So you should probably come arrest them. And that was the case of Ollie and the magic microphone.